I was 28 when I started shooting this movie. I knew it would be funny then, but, when you're 21 or something, 28 sounds pretty damn old. But, yeah, I was the old guy on the crew. I was 28. I turned 29 during production, but everybody was in their 20s, I think that's why we got sort of labeled as like a 20-something generation, just because it was a youthful type film. But, I never really set out to, to me this was about structure and this kind of experimental storytelling idea. And other than that, the content to me came second. It was these bits. But we were, upon release, kind of labeled as some generational thing, and I wouldn't have even said this is even Austin. This is a narrow segment of the population, even of Austin. But you would find this in any place, any town. There's always been people who are sort of the, whether it's beatnik, hippie, or whatever, they're always just kind of not buying in the big sense. But there's a continuum of people, usually young people, kind of in that mode. And this was just where I happened to be, and most of my friends were in that world, so it was just, that was my backyard. But I really never thought it was a big deal, When it got a little more national, I don't know, it's so much in life is just pure luck and timing. I mean, in one way, I always felt it could have happened maybe a little sooner. That's the greedy part of me, the part of me, the sense of entitlement part, like, hey, I've made a film and the world should pay attention, which they don't. And then the other part of me is like, well, we were totally prepared to travel around the country in a van and show it or sell it videos and Film Threat magazine. And, like that would have been cool too. Show it in museums or film societies or festivals, schools. I always thought it might do well at colleges. I was ready to self-book it, I've been running the film society all those years. I knew how to, present a film to the public. And we had successfully opened it in Austin, and it played 3 or 4 weeks in Austin before Orion came in and shut that down. But we had done quite well. Sold out our first, 18 shows. It was a big deal locally, So, I was really intent on setting down working philosophies and rules. I think that's what a director does. You set up the parameters of what you're trying to do. The playpen is this big. Here's what I want. And, it's always kind of hard to define exactly what a director does. We know they block scenes and they set up shots and they work with actors and they collaborate with crew members. But, you have to kind of see your material on a bigger level, some metaphoric level. You have to be the tonal taster. You got to be the question answerer. And it has to be your instincts all the way. You're sort of setting a tone. It's your movie in a way. But that doesn't mean you have to be a tyrant or that other people aren't having a lot of fun within the framework you've created. It's not Stalinism. I always wanted it to be very communal. But, it's a director's job to get everyone on the same page, working kind of from the same place. It's so funny how things time out. Sometime in that spring of 91, I was sent a book, Generation X by Doug Copeland. And right about that time, Nirvana had released Nevermind, and there was all this Seattle grunge thing was born. And someone was starting to put all this together. And it really starts with publicists. I think it was Doug's publicist, Orion Classics publicist. How do you get any attention? How do you break into the media mainstream? It's never content-based. It's never about the work itself. It's usually some bigger meta meaning. And what they were seemingly drawing on, there had been a Time magazine article not long before called 20-somethings. What do they want? I remember actually using that with Pearson, saying, hey, here's our audience. Because people would say, there's no audience for this. There's no audience. And so I would use that in an active way, saying, no, here's an audience. It's a new generation who's looking at things a little differently and blah, blah, blah. That's our audience. That would be a selling point for us. So you sort of use that, but then it became the subject itself. Who are these people? What do they want? And then it seems the way the media digests it and kicks it back out, it's sort of that's why you did it, to depict, this generation. It's no, that's not why I did it. That wasn't the motivation. But that's kind of what that's how it's seen, you know. Yeah, it was just a really kind of creepy experience to, in such a short amount of time, the first people I was talking to at those festivals, and you know, they were kind of fascinated with like the narrative structure of it, or they like the dialogues, they like some of the information in the movie, kind of the vibe of it, but particularly like the storytelling, the fact that it didn't have any story in the traditional sense. And they talked that way about Doug's book too. Generation X didn't have like a traditional 3-act structure. It was really a lot of digressive monologues and ideas, and with footnotes kind of in the margins and these different definitions. It was just kind of a wonderful experimental novel, you would say, in the way that Slacker's sort of an experimental movie. And so people were kind of into that thing. They were like, oh, that's interesting, this is interesting, and they were digging into the material. But, God, it seemed almost instantaneous. That gave way to, when it got a little more national, it was the questions like, well, I haven't seen your movie, but don't you think that the new generation thinks this? You know, it's like, excuse me? What's there to talk about, you know? Or like, I haven't read Generation X or seen your movie, but would you like to talk on Nightline tonight about something to do with, you know, 20-something people? It was just all kind of ridiculous. So it was kind of painful, actually, to see what I thought couldn't be parodied. To me, it was, you know, there's that notion of like no wave, or there's no style. There was nothing to be parodied because it wasn't so identifiable. But what I thought wasn't identifiable, as in neutral, like, say, the fashion, the way the underclass sort of dresses. Meanwhile, that was sort of being commodified, and that was sort of being studied and articulated and kind of quickly sold back. You know, there were flannel shirts soon going for $65, like designer flannel shirts. Like, that happened so fast. It was kind of scary. But, I mean, I was very aware of it. People thought the big jump in my career, looking at other movies I've done, they thought Slacker to Dazed was the big jump. But it wasn't. The big jump for me was Plow, doing everything myself, working privately, to doing Slacker, working with over 100 cast members, a rotating crew of between 7 and 15, and, you know, money issues and all the other psychic pressures that would come up in such an undertaking. You have to be sort of a head coach, you know, you got to be a taskmaster, you got to be a charmer, you got to be a manipulator, you got to, you know, all these. I had to tap into what I called like the necessary bad qualities in a personality. You know, ego, you got to be able to stand up for yourself at the right moments. You're always subtly being challenged. You know, it was a kind of a psychic minefield. I remember I was walking through going, okay, this is it. This is what a director does. You better buck up, you know, I had to tap into some long-lost part of my own personality that had maybe been a team captain in sports, you know, a decade before. That guy had to kind of reemerge in my personality. It had long been gone. But it's not what you ever thought about when you said you wanted to make films, but it's necessary. And if you can't do that, if you can't have those meetings and do that necessary crap and not feel like you're, you know, denying who you are, you know, then you really shouldn't be doing it. You won't be able to do it.